All right, welcome to What the Tech. Let's talk about the day the cloud died. Just last week, a massive outage knocked a huge chunk of the internet offline. The official story? A simple glitch. But we're here to tell you that's a lie. In this explainer, we're going to tear down that story and show you what this event really signals about the fragile world we've built. Let's get into it.
Look, this wasn't just some server that needed a reboot. It wasn't one of those minor inconveniences that a tech support team can patch up and we all forget about in an hour.
No, this was a warning shot, a massive red flashing sign about the digital house of cards we've built our entire lives on. And you know what? Most of the headlines totally miss the point.
So, let's get right into it. System failure. What actually went down? A critical Amazon Web Services data center in the US just poof went offline. And the shockwaves from that one failure, they were felt across the entire globe.
And when I say global, I mean it. All of a sudden, people couldn't get into their bank accounts. Key government services were just gone. Critical platforms your job depends on vanished. And yeah, not even kidding, thousands of people were freaking out about losing their Duolingo streaks. It really shows how everything, from our finances to our fun, can just be wiped out in a blink.
So, how does one failure cause so much chaos? Well, take a look at this. We call it the cloud cartel for a reason. This isn't some diverse, healthy market. It's basically a duopoly. Amazon and Microsoft control somewhere between 60 and 80% of the entire market. When you put that much of the internet's foundation in so few hands, you're basically building a single point of failure for the whole world. And that creates this nasty little vulnerability called nested dependency. Think about it like this. Your company might not use AWS directly, but the payroll software it relies on probably does. It's a digital Jenga tower. One tiny piece gets pulled from the bottom, and the entire thing can come crashing down. That is the very definition of concentrated risk.
So you have to ask yourself, how in the world did we let it get this bad? Well, that brings us to the story they want you to believe. Let's call it the convenience lie.
You've heard the corporate buzzwords, right? They love talking about hyperscalers and economies of scale. The pitch is simple. It's cheaper and way more efficient to just rent server space from a giant like us than to build your own. And, on the surface, it sounds logical. It really does.
But let's be real. Economies of scale is just a polite way of saying something else entirely. It's a smokescreen, a cover for concentrating market power in a way that helps a few huge companies at everyone else's expense. I mean, come on. Is this structure really about making things more efficient for everybody? Or is it about making a couple of companies so unbelievably powerful that everyone else becomes dangerously dependent on them? Here's the raw truth. This whole setup is an industrial-scale convenience subsidy for executives. They get to report amazing short-term cost savings by outsourcing their infrastructure. The board loves it, they get their bonuses. And the long-term risk of a total system collapse? Well, that gets passed on to the rest of us, the customers, the small businesses, the people left in the dark when it all fails.
So let's talk about the real price we're paying for all this so-called convenience. This is the stuff that gets buried deep below the headlines about services being restored.
First, stop calling this an incident. That's just PR spin. This was a systemic failure of architecture, a choice, not an accident. Second, there's a huge moral hazard here. Insurers and auditors have basically rubber-stamped this whole fragile system. And third, vendor lock-in isn't a bug, it's a feature. The ridiculously high cost of switching away from AWS, that's by design, to keep you trapped.
So, what do we do about it? Well, the whole conversation around solutions is usually just superficial nonsense. So it's time to separate the window dressing from the real structural changes we actually need.
On one side, you got the weak fixes. People say, oh, just mandate that companies use 2 cloud providers. That's totally useless if you can't actually move your stuff between them. Now, on the other side, you have the real prescriptions. Instead of just adding a second provider, let's force data portability so switching is actually possible. Let's treat cloud concentration like the systemic risk it is, just like our power grid. And let's reform liabilities so these companies have real skin in the game when their systems go down.
So, where does that leave us? This is the final verdict. Once you cut through all the jargon and the corporate spin, you realize pretty quickly there is no safe, neutral middle ground on this. It all comes down to a choice. We can either accept this fragile, centralized model and just wait for the next inevitable failure, or we can decide to pay the price now,
Yeah, that means public money, that means regulation, and it means a lot of messy politics to build a digital world that isn't one server away from total collapse.
This outage isn't just a curiosity for the tech news cycle. It is a blaring 5-alarm fire of a wake-up call. And if governments and corporate boards respond with nothing but empty apologies and a few tiny tweaks, they are actively choosing to outsource our entire digital existence to a handful of engineers who only answer to their investors.
It's time to demand better. Thanks for watching. If you want more analysis that cuts through the hype and tells you what's really going on, make sure you like and subscribe to WtT. We'll see you next time.